Hey, how's it going? So yeah, I did this painting of myself when I just came into my new studio space here, and didn't really have anything, didn't have any source material yet, so I just did a self-portrait one day, and now I'm going to paint over it, and I'm going to turn it into a Picasso portrait. It's kind of hard to figure out which era of Picasso to do, actually, because there's so many different, there's the blue period and the rose period, of course. But then he goes Cubism, then he's got these kind of childlike portraits. So I'm gonna go for Picasso around 1930, I guess, 1930 we can call it. I should do 1920 because it's 100 years ago. Maybe I should do that. We'll see. It's gonna be an amalgamation of a bunch of Picassos. See how it goes. So getting into it, I really can't stand this self-portrait that I did. And behind it you can see a cloud demo that I did previously, a little bit of the blue and the clouds showing through. So this is just a canvas that I've worked over and over throughout the years. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. Feel free to ask questions in the chat if you're there. And yeah, let me know that you can hear me all right. Going through OBS here. Basically, I'm just going to start off by mixing up a dark color and pretty much hacking away at this portrait. Thinking about multiple viewpoints, multiple perspectives. But the one thing with Picasso, I mean, he had such an incredible career, and he did his first self-portrait at age 15, and he'd go on to keep making self-portraits until he was 90 years old. So that can be something cool to check out. If you want to Google something out, you can look at, there's probably a website that has Picasso through the ages, where you can see his first self-portraits. But he was a child prodigy, so he would start painting and drawing and doing all these things when he was super young. Supposedly his first word was pencil, or lapis in in Spanish. But who knows? There's always legends around different artists. We like legends. They help us describe the world in an easier fashion, right? But yeah, supposedly his first word was pencil. But he was definitely a genius. His dad worked at the university, actually, teaching painting and set design and stuff like this. And so he came from an artistic family, which feeds into the whole idea of 10,000 hours, if you've ever heard that. Malcolm Gladwell talks about it. It's pretty much the concept that you need 10,000 hours of work to master something. And the entire concept of genius itself has recently come under fire in the past couple decades. Believe it or not, a lot of people don't like the concept of genius because it privileges a certain subset of individuals who tend to come from wealthy backgrounds and privileged backgrounds of some sorts. The one problem I see with that is basically that we have to deal with prodigies somehow. You know? Bobby Fischer playing chess. When I was 8, Bobby Fischer would definitely beat me in chess, you know? And there's nothing I could probably do about it. I could probably be trying to learn how to play chess really well every single day until I was 8 years old, and Bobby Fischer would still beat me in chess, no matter what. I'm sorry I can't be Michael Jordan. But the idea of genius and prodigies comes up with Picasso because he displayed this remarkable talent. And I actually looked up, before I jumped into this, I looked up, what does a prodigy actually mean? What type of traits do they exhibit? And what I found is that usually they work as an adult expert. So they work at the level of an adult expert before they're 10 years old. So you can apply that to whatever field that you want, whether it be music or painting. But of course, this also applies to the sciences as well, of course, as we know. And so, whether we want to have a more egalitarian approach to who is and who is not a genius kind of doesn't matter in some ways, because we still end up with prodigies. We still end up with these people that are clearly above and beyond. And Picasso was one of those people. If you don't believe me, Google out Picasso Communion. Look at the Communion painting he did when he was like 14 years old. So he was super accomplished. He went to the academy when he was just 13. And the people in the US might not know this, but it's really common in a lot of European schools for there to be an entrance exam process. So students actually have to come in and they have to draw on site at the university. So if you thought like getting together your reference letters was a pain, 100 years ago in most European schools you would actually take like a month of entrance exams. So you would have different things every single day. You'd come in and one day it's like, okay, draw this sack of flour. And you're like, okay. And then the next day it would be like, here are 3 lines, make a composition with them. Or, they had all these different sort of tests. They still have them today in many schools. And they still have pretty common things you wouldn't expect, like figure drawing and things like this that you'd think might be out of fashion or whatever. But people still do these sort of tests and this sort of stuff. So, anyway, Picasso had to do these tests when he was 13 years old. I'm sure his dad was a professor, so he obviously had the hookup and knew how to talk about art, was looking at art, And he got in a week. And usually it would take a month to do all these tests. But Picasso did them all in a week, and then famously, you'll see this on every single website ever written about Picasso, but famously his dad turned in his paints and turned in his palette, and he was just like, I can't do it. My kid surpassed me at 13. So he gave up his palette, and Picasso took over from there. He was pretty much off to the races. But you would think, growing up that way, just the way we regard child stars and their development, right? It does have it would create a different perception of the world, certainly. So in this painting, I'm just kind of I'm going for the side view and going to try to do the front view on that left eye, my right eye, and then do the side view move on the other eye. Of course, we're always looking at multiple perspectives with Picasso, and you can even think about, the approach to Cubism and the approach to creating these portraits. A lot of it comes from Picasso. There's some quote, I hope it's Picasso, I could be wrong, but there's some quote that Cézanne is the grandfather of us all, where he basically meant that Cézanne's approach to painting was one which continued to resonate for, decades and decades to come later. And Picasso, of course, was a huge fan of Cézanne. Another legend about Picasso was that he carried around a gun with blanks in it, and if anybody ever said anything wrong about Cézanne, he'd point the gun at him and act like he'd shoot him. So he was going hard for Cézanne. But really, when we're looking at Cézanne, we're looking at a way of looking at the world that we might not think is so obvious quite at first. Like, you might go into a museum and look at a Cézanne, as I did in the Art Institute of Chicago, for instance. I don't know the name of the painting, but they just have apples. It's just these apples on a table. And pretty much when you see these apples, you're like, oh, there's some apples, and the part of the table's lower than the other half. Okay. But really, what's going on with Cézanne is Cézanne's analyzing the world, he's breaking it up into bits, and then he's putting it back together, which is actually a way a lot of concept design, even if you look at a lot of these concept design videos or concept art videos for video games and stuff like this, or Loomis, these types of how to draw books that you'll find in the 1920s and 1930s, they're really about analyzing the world in kind of a logical fashion, in looking at a wine bottle, for instance, and thinking, oh, this is a cylinder that gets smaller, and it's got another cylinder that's smaller on top of this main cylinder, right? So it's a logical way of constructing the world into these simple primitives. And if we look at, modern 3D animation programs and this sort of stuff, we're also still using these primitives, they're called, actually. So primitives are just those shapes: spheres, cubes, pyramids, cylinders, all this sort of stuff. So when you look at Cézanne, the important thing to kind of take away from it is imagine that happening, that type of looking begin to happen, right? And you can listen to an entire podcast. I actually did a whole podcast on Cézanne on Spotify and all the rest. Just check for the Painting Podcast, and you'll be able to listen to that whole podcast just on Cézanne. That was the other thing in the running this week on my community poll, community vote for what I would do for this painting-like video. And Picasso Portraits won, thankfully. I was glad. It was Picasso Portraits, Cézanne Landscape, or Richard Estes Cityscape were the choices that I put in there. But I was glad that Picasso Portrait won, because I'm like, oh, okay, I can do that. That'll be fun. Not too much stress. I shouldn't say that because it's Picasso, but at the same time, Picasso has such a playful approach to painting that you can kind of be playful when you're trying to paint a Picasso, or if you want to paint like Picasso, then being playful in your approach, I think, is super important. And also, if you want to paint like Picasso, you should not worry about your edges too much, and don't worry about blending too much. It's funny, when I Googled out different, Picasso portraits, I saw a lot of people painting like Picasso in their own various styles and this sort of stuff. And basically, a lot of them just blend too much. It's all about the edges, and I think keeping the edges kind of dirty and, grungy and this sort of thing. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Hope you can all hear me all right. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that you can hear me? That would be awesome. Just to make sure my levels are all right. I'm going through OBS, so I got a lot of different... Feels like I got a lot of different things going at the same time. Anybody out there? Say something in the live chat. Can you hear me all right? Nothing? Alright, well, I can see the levels bouncing, so I'm just going to have faith. Good. Thank you, Elias. Or Eliash. Sweet. Yeah, I'm going through OBS, so basically I got different things going on. I just started getting on Twitch. I signed up for Twitch, twitch.tv/oil paintings, and kind of digging on the live stream approach, I guess, where we can interact in real time as well. You figure you spend so much time painting anyway, or I spend so much time painting, might as well play around with it a little bit more for these types of paintings. You know, I have my own paintings that I do as well that are, maybe they're going to blend into this sort of stuff at a certain point, you know, because it's one of those things where you're supposed to be a serious artist, right? And I'm represented by a gallery and all this sort of stuff, so I should be serious. And, you know, I don't know many people live streaming their painting, but we're having to go with it, I guess. So at this point, I'm still just drawing, figuring out where I'm going to go with the next step. And I don't use a lot of paint thinner, actually. I use quite a small amount of paint thinner when I'm painting. I don't like to get it too thinned out. So just mixing with a little bit of that linseed oil there. I have linseed oil with some liquid in it, and that just helps it dry, because my studio is pretty chilly. When I'm not there, I don't keep it heated when I'm not there, so the paintings are cold when I'm gone, and then they get all warmed up when I come back. So starting out with this olive green and beginning to trying to find forms. I think the light's going to be coming from the top right corner there. So simple form lighting, more or less, generally goes from the top right down. You'll see this in all sorts of paintings. So if you ever want to take a photo of yourself for a self-portrait, the simplest way is just to have that form light go above your head and to the right, or go above your head and to the left. And that's probably the best way. A lot of times I see students trying to like put the light sideways at their face, and that tends to create really, really hard shadows and almost black off half of your face. So if you go up into the right or left, you get a little bit of light on your cheek as well to light up that other side a little bit more. Not that this was a decent portrait to begin with. That's why I'm attacking it. I just got into my new studio, and I had cad red, cad yellow, titanium white, phthalo blue, and nothing in my studio besides a chair and an easel. And you think about just how much time it takes to get really cozy in a studio. It doesn't happen immediately, you know? So I didn't know what to paint, and I was like, I might as well just do a self-portrait. I have a couple hours. So I had to break in the studio with this self-portrait that I'm painting over now. And I paint over my paintings all the time. Sometimes they're just not good paintings, so you can do whatever you want with them. But as somebody making portraits all the time in my other work, if you want to check my Instagram, I'll put it in the thing in a second. But yeah, usually I do more abstract portraits and this sort of stuff. But these are fun too. I like being able to try and paint like another artist. And, you know, if this thing doesn't turn out, I don't really care in some way. You know, a lot of it's just about the attempt at trying to paint like somebody else. I think that's important, because it's not really a master copy. You know, when you're looking directly at somebody else's painting and trying to copy that painting, that's helpful too. But I think when you're trying to use the techniques and processes of another artist and make your own composition in that artist's style, that can really help you just see the world in a different way, and maybe get a little glimpse into the way that artist created that world as well, of course. So that's why I like making these. And if you want to buy it, it's $250 when I finish. Write it down in the comments. And we'll see what it looks like. Hopefully it'll be worth it. Just going for this sideways eye here. I'm going to keep all my paints really simple and earth tony, I guess. I want to keep everything limited palette, which is a simple way to create harmony. A lot of people always think that you got to read a book about color harmony and how color works and all this sort of stuff. The simplest way to get colors to work is literally just limit your palette. So here I just got cad yellow, cad red, phthalo blue, titanium white, ivory black on my palette there, and that'll kind of naturally keep the harmonies of the colors in a certain realm as well. But starting off, putting this little orange triangle around this sideways eye, starting to see that second face begin to emerge from that nose as well, the sideways version of the face. We got some sounds from one of my friends, Ryan Cole, in the background, the ambient tracks. He actually put all his stuff up on archive.org, so if you're interested in that, they're all downloadable for free. It's a zip file, and he made a different ambient song every single day for an entire summer, so I think there's 90 different ambient tracks that he made. I like to have beeping around in my background. Copyright free, which is good as well. So when we think about Picasso, we can't help but think about the bull as well. And I'm definitely not painting myself as a bull. Although if I were doing a self-portrait, maybe I should have thought more in a bullish way. Or a Minotaur, of course. Because Picasso was big into Minotaurs, and would often paint himself as one. But if you haven't yet, check out Picasso self-portraits through the ages, and you'll get a really good view of all the different types of styles that he painted in. And that's one thing that kind of distinguishes Picasso in a lot of ways as well, is that he really wasn't afraid to approach painting in any way that he saw fit that would help him out for that particular painting. So some of his paintings are really refined and realistic, and then of course some are more childlike, and others are really chunky. That's my favorite period of Picasso paintings. Around the 1930s or so, he started making these really chunky figures at the beach with these big hands, and they almost look like cartoon characters made with oil paint that are of these simple primitive forms as well. So this is after Cubism, and he would still be using these same simple forms in his work, actually. But I love those paintings. I think if you googled out like 1930s beach Picasso, you'd probably be able to find him. But Picasso's one of those guys too, you think like, or maybe not everybody does, but he's Spanish, and there's a certain aspect of that in his work as well. Thinking about the Minotaur, the bull, and the bull being, an important cultural heritage in Spain as well. And Picasso's first painting would be of a bullfighter when he was just 9 years old. He made a painting of a bullfighter. And then I think he made a painting of his son, Claude, as a bullfighter as well, when he was like 9 or 10 years old. When his son was 9 or 10 years old, he did a painting of him as a matador. But matadors are kind of interesting because we think about, they're supposed to be really macho and tough and stuff like this, right? Because they're killing a bull. But in a lot of ways, they're also really feminine, and they have these fluffy pink ruffles, and they're kind of dancing about a little bit, so it's kind of like where you reach like Macho Man Randy Savage level of machismo. It kind of like tilts over a little bit, and it's like, wait a minute, is this Macho Man Randy Savage? Like, he's wearing feathers, like pink and blue feathers and all this sort of stuff, and that's supposed to be super masculine, But Anyway, the Matador is kind of similar to that as well. I have not read, Joseph Termir is asking, have I read Life with Picasso by Françoise Gillot? Françoise Gillot would be his second wife, I think. He had 3 wives, Marie-Thérèse, François, and Jacqueline. But I have not read Life with Picasso. I imagine it's probably pretty brutal. There was that movie that came out with Picasso. What was it called? Surviving Picasso, which I've watched as well. And obviously he had a really tumultuous relationship with women as well. I think 2 of his wives ended up committing suicide. And then his kid Claude, who he painted as a matador, I can't remember who it was, if it was Jacqueline, didn't let Claude come to his funeral, and then Claude drank a glass of bleach and took him 3 months to die. Rough times for the Picasso family. So I imagine Life with Picasso is a pretty good read as well, for sure. You can even see those. It's kind of crazy to think, how long Picasso lived. When we think in our heads, just it's around 1880 to 1973. 1881 to 1973. And he lived 90 years, so he had a long time to make a lot of work as well. But just the span, that's 20 years after the Civil War, I guess, right? I think the Civil War in the United States was around 1860. So he would be born about 20 years after that, and he's still living in 1973, still being super famous and well known as well. And just how that works, it seems like a long time ago, but in a way it's kind of not a long time ago. I don't know, especially now with time getting so strange. But yeah, he was still alive 50 years ago, which I guess is pretty long time ago, but it doesn't seem like a long time ago. It's like when you think of Kirk Douglas, Kirk Douglas, the famous actor, his dad was born in 1880. And Kirk Douglas just died, I think, maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago. His dad was born in 1880 in Russia, which is pretty nuts. So it's strange how time works throughout the ages like that. And 1880, so Kirk Douglas, an actor that's still making movies 20 years ago, had his dad was born in 1880. Doesn't make any sense. Well, his dad was old when he had him. I think his dad was in his 40s when Kirk was born. But Picasso would still be around until the early 1970s, of course. And you have to think, I just love the approach where you can just approach any painting in the way you want, and you can use any approach that you want. I don't really like the word style that much. Just when we talk about what's the style of Picasso, I get what it means, but I just think we could just think more in terms of what are the techniques or what are the processes that he employs in the creation of paintings. But being able to approach things like that is really different than the way most people think about painting now, of course, right? Because the best way that people think about it is I gotta make a style, and then people are gonna recognize me for this style. That's gonna be my thing. So we get artists like Kaws, Kaws. If you don't know him, he basically puts X's on Mickey Mouse heads. That's his claim to fame. And started off as a street artist. But that's his whole deal, Mickey Mouse with X eyes, making sculptures of Mickey Mouse with X eyes, making paintings of Mickey Mouse with X eyes, getting a giant inflatable sculpture and putting it in a harbor, and it's Mickey Mouse with X eyes again. So we think of, branding in this way, but Picasso would just change everything for every painting, and that it's pretty consistent. Of course, he's a big part of Cubism, and we can associate him with that. But he's still painting realistically. He's still painting, like he's got that painting of Olga in a chair, I think around 1916 or so. And that's pretty much a straightforward approach to painting, realistic, naturalistic painting. And then the next painting is going to be a cubist deconstruction of a face or something like that. So we can think of where these cubist portraits would be coming from. And basically in Paris at that time when he was there was a lot of masks. So a lot of masks would be coming into Paris that people would buy, because African artifacts, wooden sculptures, just become a thing that people start buying in fairs, or not fairs, but like open markets in these types of places. And this is directly related to France's colonization of Africa that would be happening at that same time as well. So there's definitely that aspect to the work that can be looked at and examined further as well. What is that line of cultural sharing and cultural appropriation and these sort of things that's present in Picasso's work? We could dissect that for hours and hours. But the main thing, or a good takeaway, I think, is when we just start thinking about Picasso, when he's presented with these masks and these African sculptures, which he was buying. We know he was buying them because they're in his studio. I think you can still visit his studio, and they're there still. So he's definitely inspired by them. But we look back and we start thinking about Cézanne again. What is it about Cézanne? Cézanne is analyzing, breaking up, and reassembling the world. And this goes back to the 3D concept artist method of creating the world as well, where we're taking the world apart, we're breaking it down into simple forms, we're deconstructing that, and then we're reassembling it into something else. And of course it feeds into ideas of symbolism as well. You're looking at 1880 or so, Bouguereau, and a very realistic, naturalistic, academic approach to painting is happening during this time as well. So we have this whole approach to painting, and you're supposed to look, and your eye is super important, and what you see in front of you is what you should make on the canvas in front of you as well. But there's another approach, and I'm sure that these smart people have written about this a lot more, but there's this way of making an eye. Okay, maybe an eye just needs to be a circle with another circle inside of it. That can be an eye. Do we need to really render out all these forms? And of course, Picasso could render these all out. By the time he was 13 or 14 years old, he'd have no problem painting like Jan van Eyck if he wanted to pursue that for his entire life. But he jumped into just simplifying these forms instead, and more likely than not, this came from those sculptures. And he wouldn't be the first person to be influenced by, another culture's work from a far-off place. If you look at Van Gogh as well, Van Gogh was obsessed with Chinese and Japanese prints. So really, really simple prints of the world that are breaking, no, they're not simple, I shouldn't say that, but breaking the landscape into these giant forms rather than worrying about this little cloud should be, or is the light right on this cloud, And so if you look at, there's especially one painting from Van Gogh called Lilacs, I believe, and you can look at that painting and just see the immediate influence from that culture as well. But Picasso is certainly breaking these forms down, and the idea of a mask becomes super important, and how we think about masks. And Picasso's actually although not credited, usually, he was definitely aware of the Surrealists, because they would be, a lot of Catalans, of course, would be the Surrealists with Salvador Dali. He would be born about 20 years after Picasso, actually. So they were both aware of each other. I don't know if Picasso ever said anything about Dali or not, but Dali was certainly very much influenced and definitely looked up to Picasso as a famous Spanish painter. He was the most famous, he was the most famous painter that could be from Spain. So I'm sure there was an influence from those two. And Spain's got a ridiculous lineage of painting. We've got Zurbarán and Ribera, and of course Gaudi in Barcelona. And Barcelona would be where Picasso's family would move to in the 1890s. So he'd grow up in Barcelona looking at Gaudi's strange blobby church and these sort of things. So there's definitely a lineage that he could see from an early age that would lead towards Spanish painters and bulls and these sort of things. But, the Minotaur, that's a real Greek thing. And we've seen Greece just won't go away. It just keeps popping up. And, the concept of the Minotaur, I don't know how to say it. It comes up again and again and again with Picasso, and using a character to describe yourself. And you just think about how we interact with mythology and legends and even religion, and looking at these parables that were written thousands of years ago, and then applying them to our daily lives in some sort of way. So Picasso becomes obsessed with this idea of the Minotaur, but also the mask. So there's a collision of different symbolism there. We can see masks and minotaurs. Oftentimes he'll have a minotaur mask like in his drawings, and you can kind of like take it off and see an old Picasso underneath this minotaur mask. And of course the bull is represented in the Minotaur because it is what was the Minotaur's dad was a bull. If we go back to the actual Greek mythology of it, it's Pasiphae and Minos, and basically Poseidon gives Minos and he's like, you got to kill this bull, this like really nice white bull, and Poseidon gives Minos this bull, and Minos is like, I really like this bull, and then Poseidon's like, what? You were supposed to kill it. So as his punishment, Poseidon makes the bull fall in love with his wife. And so wife and the bull have a kid together, the Minotaur. And then they put it in a maze, and they feed like Athenian children and young damsels to this Minotaur. Like they feed like 12 of them a year to this Minotaur. So then somebody ends up killing it. I can't remember, like Daedalus puts it in a maze, and then it's like another one of their kids finally ends up, his daughter, I think the daughter of Pasiphae and an Athenian boy end up hooking up, and they're happy, and then he kills the bull kills the Minotaur finally. I don't know. I mean, the Minotaur probably was just born into a bad situation. You can't blame him, really. I don't know, because he's living in a maze. He's in a giant labyrinth his whole life, and he just gets to eat people, once a year. Probably not a great existence there. So I don't know. But anyway, Picasso's short. He's 5'4", and all his girlfriends are all, consistently shorter than he is as well. So he's a small guy with a really, really big ego, obviously. If you want to check out a good documentary on him, there's a I don't know if it's all on YouTube, but check out the Picasso Mystery, or the Mystery of Picasso. If you can find it somewhere, you'd probably be able to hunt it down somewhere on the internet. But I think it's called the Picasso Mystery, and it's a film. It's a French film made of Picasso painting, and he's just got a piece of paper on a piece of glass, and essentially they're filming the glass from the other side so that you don't see his hand. You just see, you know, the brush soaking in and making marks on the paper. And it's actually a really interesting documentary because it's essentially just him painting. There's not a lot of like interviews with him or anything like this. It's basically just Picasso painting. And so, yeah, that's a good one to check out, the Picasso Mystery, or the Mystery of Picasso. If you can find that, check that out. But you'll see in the documentary that he often is destroying his paintings. You know, he'll start off trying to paint a rooster, and then he's like, no, it's not working, and like black it all out, and then turn it into a face, and then turn it into a chicken butt. You know, it's like just constantly morphing and evolving, which kind of speaks to this idea of painting being an activity where you really open yourself up for these chances and open yourself up to these possibilities, you know. So they say, like, with painting, if you know how it's going to turn out, the painting's dead before you begin. So sometimes I think there is a method of painting where you can be super meticulous and you make sketches beforehand, and you're like, I want this to be like this, and I'm going to study the light like this, and it's going to work. And you can probably do that. You take a really illustrative approach to painting, but it can also be nice to just kind of let go of that as well and allow it to morph into whatever you want it to as you're painting it. Now, of course, with oil paint, if you're doing a lot of morphing, it's literally going to get muddy, you know. So at a certain point, you got to just stop, because if you put color on top of color on top of color, it's just going to start getting muddy, and you're not going to get that, you know, lusciousness that we associate with oil paint. So just kind of making my throat into a box, and kind of got a sideways beard going on there as well. Try to box that up a little bit more. Trying to figure this light out, but I'm going for light from the upper right. You know, I had a meeting with Jed Pearl. He did a studio visit with me, and he's a critic for the New York Times, actually. And a lot of my portraits are meant to be really chaotic, and because they're about the digital age and avatars and how our personalities are an amalgamation of these online personas and video game personas and our real life personas and all this. It's supposed to be messy, and it's supposed to be, you know, chaotic. And I really like Jed Pearl. I got beers with him and stuff as well. And he came into my studio, and he was just like, he's like, okay, I can see you know how to paint. It was like a saving grace. I should have just ended it there. Be like, all right, thanks a lot. You know, let's grab a beer. But he's like, but what? Why is the light coming from here and here? And, you know, with Picasso portraits, he actually brought up Picasso portraits, and he's like, with Picasso portraits, like, there's still two eyes, you know? There's still just two eyes and one mouth. They, you know, sometimes he's got the double eye thing, you know, but in looking at a lot of Picasso portraits, you kind of see that as goofy as they are, they're still kind of simple. There's still a person sitting in a chair, maybe their head's bent this way and their eyes are going the other way or whatever. But it's still a pretty simple, straightforward approach to painting in a lot of ways, you know? Alright, I gotta get this thing off. I'm gonna go for the big switcheroo. I've got a tripod upside down on my easel. So we're gonna go for the switcheroo move. It's gonna work. They're the world's worst scissors. in business. I got the world's worst scissors from this shop. Like, you can bend it sideways and it doesn't cut. You just have to use it as like a knife. So I duct tape my tripod upside down to my easel there. Just going for the standard butterfly collar. Put myself in this nice old chair as well, which is kind of Picasso-y. You can also think about Picasso having pattern on pattern on pattern on pattern, which is really pretty common as well. And so, who was that person in the 80s? Lisa Frank. If you look at like a Lisa Frank notebook cover, if you remember those, and they were like, you know, Zach Morris, Saved by the Bell sort of patterns. And that's kind of what I'm going for. Is the not going for it in this painting, but that's kind of what Picasso often would be going for. It was like, oh, we just put stripes here, and then we'll put diamonds in the background. And you just make stuff more and more interesting as you use this pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern in that regard. But here I'm just going for the simple diamonds, give the idea of some wallpaper happening in the background. I want to try to get a better angle of this. It's weird looking through the camera. It's always changing. I know I always say that, but just look through the camera and it's always changing everything. Kind of deadens. It's like making the yellow too bright. Because it's one thing with our phones. A lot of times I'll have students, when they come in and they show me a picture, I'm like, yeah, that's not a good picture to work from. And it's just because the phone's trying to be too smart, and it's turning up the color too much in some areas, it's turning it down in other areas. Of course, we have this AI, I don't know what's going on with any of that, AI photography enabled, where it's trying to figure out, oh, this is grass, so let's make it greener, you know. But when we look at a lot of painting, we're especially painting from 100 years ago, we're dealing primarily with neutral grays. And so neutral grays are basically just the grays of the entire color field world. You know, think of the grays of reds, the grays of blues, these sort of things. You can actually just mix up different piles of gray on your palette and mix it right into all these different colors. Or Rembrandt supposedly would use that muck that you get at the bottom of your painting thinner jar. You know, when you have a jar full of paint thinner for a long time, it gets that layer of gray muck at the bottom. I don't know. I don't think that. I've tried to use it and work with it, and it's kind of pasty. It feels like too toothpastey. But I remember I had somebody swear that that's how Rembrandt was creating his backgrounds, is that he would like smear this muck onto his canvas. But it's like there's no oil in it at all. It's like completely void of any oil. So that's a little bit, I don't know. I don't know if I like the muck. Maybe you can like take the muck out and dry it and then like add linseed oil to it or something like that and then paint with it. But for the most part, I don't really see it. music is loud. I can turn the music down. Get inside my old head. There we go. Should be better. Yeah, this is my buddy's tracks. Thanks for letting me know that, Yazid. I get in my own head. I have headphones on when I'm talking, so oftentimes I don't like the quiet. It's like when I'm teaching, there's always this quiet when I'm teaching online, and you're by yourself and it's just so quiet. So I've been in the habit of just putting headphones on. So thanks for letting me know the music was up too high. So at this point, just trying to pop in that other side of the chair. Seems to be working all right. Keeping it light, just simple stuff, just thinking simply here. Light side, dark side. It's always good to just break these things down to those simple components. What side's lighter, what side's darker, what direction's the light coming from. And the good thing about Picasso, it doesn't have to line up. It's probably better if it doesn't. At least this, this style. I just said it. I said style. But, yeah. Starting to get there. Starting to feel it. Thank you for everybody who's stuck around from the beginning. You've seen the evolution of this so far. What are we at? 51 minutes in. Probably go another 20 minutes or so. And got a little bit more time left on her, I think. But the main thing, I'm pretty happy with the side view versus the front view. Jump into this, just mixing some grays. Sometimes it's good to just go for gray if you don't want to bring too much attention to the area. You think of Degas, of course. There's a lot of gray going on. Rembrandt as well, who I was just talking about too. Also just a lot of gray happening. Picasso, of course, comes up with the concept of collage as well, more or less. And that'd come from the word, I believe it's coller, C-O-L-L-E-R. I don't know what it's spelled. But essentially it just means glue. But when we think about cubism, it's easy to also think about collage. Cutting stuff up, putting it sideways, putting it in the front. Maybe it just popped into my head now, but one cool assignment you could engage in, which could be fun, would just be to, use one magazine and, cut an eye from the front, cut an eye from the side, and make a head, something like that. That could be fun, and then paint that. So MK Ultra, nice username. MK Ultra 3 is asking, didn't these painters put sand in their oils? Sometimes, sure. Sand and oil paints, I've used it before, and it actually works really well. It's a really simple medium, and I kind of like it. It makes it. Picasso certainly did it in a couple. I think he had a painting he did of kind of an insect-like looking woman on the beach that I can think of that has a really yellow beach area as well that I think is using that. Jean Dubuffet, who would be known as an outsider artist in France, he'd also put sand into his oil paint quite a bit. And it's you can just use normal sand. You don't need like special sand. Just go to the hardware store and get like sand for a sandbox, and you got to use more paint, of course. But you could use, cheap colors like yellow ochre or something like that with sand, and get a big tube of it. It's a really nice, makes a really nice background. It makes a really nice thick sandiness to it, yeah. thing about Picasso and his view of things, I guess, too, is how we view problems and problem solving. And so I guess that's what we generally think of revolutionary artists as doing, is having this superpower, this ability. People would hate that I said superpower. But yeah, I mean, I just totally lost my train of thought. Superpower, because I got caught in the whole genius. Got caught in the genius thing. If you go to art school for too long, they will tell you that geniuses don't exist. Basically, that's the whole thing. And painters have this superpower. That's what I was saying. This superpower to see the world in a different way than other people were. Now it could be with video games, or it could be with movies. Somebody who really revolutionizes the way we look at film, for instance, or somebody that revolutionizes just the way we see. So that's, we go back to Cézanne again, and really the way Cézanne sees the world changes the way Picasso actually sees the world as well. So that's kind of an amazing thing. And now I'm making this painting, a cheap rip-off, of a painting, of a Picasso painting, trying to imitate, but doing my best with the ideas that I've got. And like I said, I don't mind if these things don't turn out perfectly. They don't need to be perfect. I'm just on the quest, and I'm happy that y'all are along with it, with me. We'll see how it actually works out in the end. I'm getting closer. Just thinking those simple shapes as well. Triangles, squares, light from a certain way, this sort of thing. Thanks to Nirvana, I wanna. 419, one away from 420. And Yazid as well. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of artists they think they're too good for YouTube or something, or I don't know. Or there's a snobbishness about a certain way of painting where people are like, this should be secret. I shouldn't share all my secrets with other people. And I think that's just silliness. Paintings throughout all the years have had this secretive approach. It's why with the Flemish painters, when we think about, they used projectors, that they kept secret. They didn't want people to know they were using a projector. I bet a lot of people still do that today, right? But it's silly, It's like, whatever. Use whatever technology you want. It's the end product that matters, in my mind. Use whatever you got to use in order to get there, in order to get to that end product. I think if you got to cut stuff up and paste it on a canvas, well, they've been doing that 100 years now, so that's okay. Don't worry. It's okay to just cut out an eyeball and put it on a canvas and then paint around it. Use whatever approach you need. You need to print a part of your painting, whatever. Use a plotter to make it. I don't have my plotter here, but I wish I did. But it was kind of fun to interact with. I imagine more people will be using them in the future, but a plotter is basically like a printer, but you can put your own marker in it or paintbrush in it. It's kind of the antithesis of using an actual hand to make something. But now I'm here in Prague and just getting acquainted with my new studio. And as you can see in the bottom right there, it's Oko Academy is my school, I guess I can call it, that I'm starting in Prague. It's a one-on-one mentorship program where I just work with one artist and mentor them over the course of 7 weeks. It's kind of the antidote to all these online classes. I teach online classes, so I think they're good, and I think a lot of stuff can be done online. However, I'm just trying to strip that all away. I'm going to work with one student every 7 weeks and just work with them individually in this space, in my studio. So I'm just getting that started right now. And obviously it's impossible to get students because we're still in lockdown here. But I just have a feeling that once everything gets okay, that there's going to just be more and more people who want to engage and just sit down with somebody and paint, because there's so many art teachers that just don't paint. You know, I think the best thing you can see in an art teacher is somebody who's willing to sit down with you and paint with you. You know, and it's just something that doesn't occur. We do so much talking in art schools now, and presentations, and make a PowerPoint of your favorite artist, you know, and these sort of things, that there's just not a lot of time where people are just sitting down and being like, oh, mix your colors this way, right? And that's how I said in the last live stream as well, but that's how I learned, was Susan Stevenson was just, you know, she just took my paintbrush more or less, and she was like, what are you doing? And just showed me how to put paint on the canvas, showed me how to mix color, told me I was using the wrong colors. It's not this like mealy-mouthed approach where like, I guess you can use this. It's like, no, get cadmiums, get cad yellow, get cad red, get titanium white. You gotta have those three if you want to paint alla prima. And I literally didn't know that. I'd been in school for a year at that point. Nobody ever told me. So it's those little breaks that you're like, oh, okay, this paint works different. That's why it's going on different. Oh, if you add a little bit of linseed oil and a little bit of cobalt dryer, you can make your paint dry faster. And these sort of things I feel like are often missing. So I think we go back to this individualized approach. It'll be a good thing. And that's how painting was taught forever. So painters would always have a workshop. So like Albrecht Dürer had a workshop, you know, and he would have people come in, and they were his paintings mostly. He wasn't like sitting down with them like me, like I planned to, and be like, okay, we're going to paint apples, you know. But he still had a workshop, and he had artists that would, you know, apprentice to him in a certain way. And there's a couple places that still do that today, which I mentioned in the last live stream as well. Odd Nerdrums has like a commune in Norway that people attend, and they have to like wash the floors and sweep and stuff like that in order to paint there as well. But painting's kind of in a place where there's so many different approaches that you can take. I almost said style, but there's so many different approaches that are available now. And so like even like Yazid is saying, you know, there's a lot of the customization and the, you know, how to paint a Warhammer character and these sort of things, which is cool. I appreciate that stuff in a weird way. I understand why it's popular too. It's kind of relaxing, and you get to watch something slowly evolve, and that's always just fun to do, even if you're watching like a makeover show or Love It or List It or something like that, you know. But I think we can dive into painting as being something that's really, really old too. Getting closer. How are we doing here? Just got to take a second and look at it. Always good to just take a break, look at your painting. Alright. I think I got about 10 more minutes. Got about 10 more minutes in me. 10 more minutes in this painting at least as well. But we're getting kind of close. I'm digging on the collar, the right side to the left side. Lips are backwards. You know, the top lip should generally be a little darker than the bottom lip. Generally the top lip just simply is in shadow because the angle of the top lip kind of goes back and the bottom lip comes forward, but whatever. I'm just gonna strengthen this area up a little bit more, get rid of some of that old underpainting. Just going with these grays. Picasso would use a lot of bright colors, but Vuillard is a great person to look at just for those grays as well. Painting within those neutral gray areas, which is kind of where I'm headed for right now. Then bust in this side of the head here. I'm not even sure what that thing is called, but it's probably a name for it. Yeah, just breaking it down in these simple planes. If you want, write down in the comments for some suggestions. Who would you want to see? Who would you want to see me try? Be kind. If somebody's like El Greco. Nope. Or Da Vinci or something. That's not a 1 hour session. I suppose I could try a drawing or something like that. That's rough though. So let me know in the comments if you're thinking of somebody that you'd like to see in one of these videos. I'll cut up this live stream too and do a proper intro on it with some images so you can see Picasso's images that he was actually doing as well. So stay tuned for that too. Oh, I don't know if this is too light. I think it's kind of like a mini ear. This thing behind it is like an orange panel. So if anybody has any ideas, don't be a stranger. Who do you want to see me try in the future? Or maybe I should just do Picasso portraits. This is fun. It's like, don't have to, so playful in the approach to it, that this is one of the funnest I've done so far. Who have I done? I've done Monet. I've done Monet, Van Gogh, Salvador Dali. I did a Picasso Cubist still life, which now I look at it and I'm like, eh. If you like this one, check out my other one, the Picasso still life. But I want to keep making these because I just enjoy the setting a time limit on myself and trying to bang something out. Maybe I'll do Rubens. I'll try a Rubens next, just because I love Rubens. He's like the Hallmark card of his day. Just strengthening up these black lines. You often see this crossover between drawing and painting in a lot of Picasso's works as well. So going in with the stronger lines to reinforce the cartoony aspect or really distinguish these different planes of the face hitting into one another. Yeah, I think I'm getting pretty close. Let's darken this up a little bit more. And you can see, of course, my palette looks like my canvas, which is what they always told me. I think we're there. So thanks a lot for watching. Nirvana Wana. Avant-garde stuff is interesting. It's fun. That's a French word too. I'm not sure what it means. I think it means like the new way or something like that. But thanks a lot for watching. And yeah, like and subscribe and all that. Check out the Painting Podcast. And I'll see you next time.